A tax freight train is bearing down on your retirement. To protect yourself, you'll have to harness the power of zero.
Hello and welcome to the Power of Zero show. I am your host, David McKnight, best-selling author of The Power of Zero, Look Before You Lerp, The Volatility Shield, and of course, most recently, Tax-Free Income for Life. If you are looking for someone to help you navigate all of the pitfalls that stand between you and the 0% tax bracket, head on over to davidmcknight.com. We'll hook you up with a member of our elite POZ advisor group, among the very best tax-free retirement specialists in the nation, trained, vetted, qualified personally by me. If you are an advisor looking to level up your game and adopt the Power of Zero worldview, head on over to powerofzero.com and opt into our free 3-part video series. We'd be happy to have a chat with you. Okay, so it looks like Joe Biden's landmark signature legislation is facing some headwinds in Congress, which is going to have implications for those of you who are looking to adopt Power of Zero retirement planning principles. Now, I'm going to be referencing an article today from npr.org, and I'm going to link to that article in show notes. This article starts by saying, as Democrats in Congress look to break the stalemate in negotiations over sweeping changes to the social safety net and investments in climate, the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus said Sunday her members would not accept a $1.5 trillion price tag. Now, remember where this $1.5 trillion price tag comes from. If you recall, Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, he's the second most powerful person in Congress right now. He basically dismissed the $3.5 trillion number out of hand. He says, look, I'll go for $1.5 trillion, but that's about my ceiling. And Kirsten Sinema out of Arizona is sort of singing the same tune. Well, there is a rising star in the Democratic Party who is the leading member for the Progressive Caucus. Her name is, and this is a name that you're going to start hearing more and more as these negotiations wear on. Her name is Pramila Jayapal, and she's a Democrat Congresswoman out of Washington. She said the $1.5 trillion figure put forward by Manchin and sort of endorsed as well by Kirsten Sinema was too small for progressives in the House to support. So she basically, while he's shooting down the $3.5 trillion number, she's shooting down his $1.5 trillion number in the very same breath. She says, because moderates are calling for a more narrow plan, the two sides remain far apart. She says, 1.5 trillion, she says, that's too small to get our priorities in. Now, before we go any further, let's review why the social infrastructure bill is so important to listeners of this podcast. Remember, Joe Biden is making tax reform part and parcel of this human infrastructure plan. The increase in tax rates on all those making more than $400,000 per year is the means by which he's planning to pay for at least a part of the human infrastructure plan. So if Joe Biden fails to get this bill passed, then the current tax law expires in 2026. And if he does get this passed, it's going to extend the Trump tax cuts for the middle class. So for those of you who are in the 22 and the 24% tax bracket, you're going to continue to enjoy those historically low tax rates for another 8 years. So in other words, if this legislation starts in 2022, then that's going to get you through 2023, 2024, all the way up through 2029. And remember, there's still time left in 2021. You can take advantage of 2021. So what that does is it gives you the ability, if you have a fair amount of money in your tax-deferred bucket, to shift that money over 9 years as opposed to 5. Now, remember, if your balance in your tax-deferred bucket is high enough, then shifting money over 5 years instead of 9 could bump you up into a tax bracket that gives you heartburn. The name of the game here is this. You want to get your money shifted quickly enough that you get all your heavy lifting done before tax rates go up for good. But you want to do it slowly enough that you don't rise into a tax bracket that gives you that sense of buyer's remorse. So really, there's a lot riding on this from a Power of Zero planning perspective. It's a difference over being able to get your shifting done over 5 years or getting your shifting done over 9 years. Now, what we also have to remember, and I've stated this in past podcasts, is that Joe Biden is on the clock. If he can't get this bill passed relatively soon, he's going to convey the impression that his party is in disarray and that they're not really going into midterm elections in a unified way. And remember, once midterms roll around, typically the party in power tends to lose the House. They tend to lose the Senate. So if you're going to get something done in Washington, you have to get it done in the first 2 years. And you really need to get it done in the first year because once you get too close to midterm elections, then people don't want to put their name on legislation that may be unpopular and may potentially get them voted out of office. So the fact that they seem to be at a stalemate in Congress over this means that they risk pushing this so far into the future that nothing happens. And there's a saying in Congress that legislation is like fish. If it lays out too long, it starts to stink. So a lot is riding on these divergent caucuses in the House and Senate being able to come together and find some unity within the next month. And I would say even within the next 2 weeks. They really are on the clock. And every week that goes by where they fail to get something passed means the reality that Joe Biden's signature legislative achievements could just disappear right into the ether. Pramila Jayapal continues. She says it's going to be somewhere between 1.5 and 3.5 trillion. And I think the White House is working on that right now because remember, what we want to deliver is childcare, paid leave, and climate change housing. But Jayapal was not clear on a price tag she would accept. She says the critical thing is let's get our priorities in and then we will figure out what it actually costs. So this is Dave again. So this is a bit of a change from the tactic that Democrats began with, which was let's start with a really large, arbitrary price tag, in this case, 3.5 trillion. And then let's sort of reverse engineer the bill. In other words, let's figure out how many of our key initiatives we can stuff into this bill based on that arbitrary $3.5 trillion price tag. And here's what Senator Bernie Sanders had to say. He says, he told this week on ABC that $3.5 trillion should be a minimum. So it's interesting. You have the people that are calling the shots, namely Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, who are stating that 1.5 trillion is sort of a ceiling. And they put all sorts of other little, prerequisites. Joe Manchin came out with a whole list of prerequisites that go along. He said, not only does it need to be 1.5 trillion, but we need to be able to have a part in there that talks about the Hyde bill. He's got a whole list of things that he gave to Senator Schumer that were prerequisites for him to be able to sign off on any legislation. So yeah, on the one hand, you have Bernie Sanders saying 3.5 trillion is actually too small. It's not big enough to get us everything that we really want. And then on the other hand, these are people in the same party. You got Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema saying 1.5 trillion really is on ceiling on these things. So really people, the two sides within the same party are just miles and miles apart, and they are on the clock. All right. Article continues. The continuing back and forth over the size of the plan comes as Speaker Nancy Pelosi moved this past week to delay a vote on the $1 trillion infrastructure plan that has already passed the Senate. Now, if you recall, Nancy Pelosi had said that the only way they were going to have an up or down vote on that $1 trillion infrastructure plan was if they, and by the way, the Republicans had actually signed off on that infrastructure plan. They were okay with it. She said the only circumstance in which they were going to have an up or down vote on that plan was if they had an up or down vote on the $3.5 trillion social infrastructure plan at the same time. Okay. So now Nancy Pelosi has basically said, we are going to separate these two bills. That was a tactic that didn't work. We are going to vote separately on the infrastructure bill and on the human infrastructure plan. And of course, that's ruffling more feathers in her caucus. Oh, by the way, they started off calling this a social infrastructure bill, and they're now calling it a social safety bill. So you can see that they're, I think, trying to subtly change the messaging of the legislation to perhaps garner a bit more support. All right, the article continues. That decision came under criticism Saturday by Senator Kirsten Sinema, who in a statement called the move an ineffective stunt. Sinema, like Manchin, has frustrated progressives for not supporting the $3.5 trillion figure. So Senator Sinema, of course, is once again criticizing that these Democrats ever had decided to tie these two votes together and sort of holding the one bill hostage unless it got tied to the other bill. Now, what does President Biden think about all this? He says he knows from his decades in the Senate that he knows how legislation gets done. He says everybody is frustrated. That's part of government, being frustrated, Biden said before departing the White House. But he said he was confident that ultimately the two bills at the center of his Build Back Better agenda would pass. All right, so here's my conclusion on all of this. The drama continues. And as the drama unfolds in Congress, we have to recognize that the longer this bill hangs out there, the longer these two bills hang out there, the less likely they are to get passed. Because every day that goes by where Joe Manchin doesn't move off his $1.5 trillion number, every day that goes by where the Democrats in Congress refuse to make any concessions on the size of the bill, then remember, this bill starts to smell a bit like dead fish, and fewer Democrats are going to want to get behind it. Fewer Democrats are going to want to sign on to it. So what does that mean for you and me? It means that every day that goes by where you don't see a headline in the papers that says human infrastructure bill passes means the likelihood that the current tax rates that we currently enjoy are going to expire in 2026. So keep your ear to the ground. We, of course, will keep you updated on all of this. But as things currently look, the divergent Democratic caucuses in the House are in disarray, and they can't seem to come to an accord over how big this package is going to be. So keep your ear to the ground on this. We will certainly keep you updated here on the Power of Zero show. If you, again, are looking to, whether it's over 5 years or 9 years, if you're looking for someone to help you navigate all of this legislation, all of these strategies as it relates to your personal retirement planning, head on over to davidmcknight.com. Happy to hook you up with a member of our elite POZ advisor group. And if you are an advisor looking to adopt the Power Zero worldview, you can head on over to powerofzero.com and log into our free 3-part video series. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we will look forward to chatting with you same time next week.